Welcome to Twisted Remedies. I'm your host, Justin Kucher, and this is a podcast about the benefits of jiu-jitsu and other non-traditional remedies in trauma recovery. We're doing something a little bit different for this episode. My guest is Mike Cancellieri from Frontline Foundations of North America. Frontline is an important organization in that they provide amazing services to first responders, veterans, and frontline workers. Mike and I talked for quite a bit longer than I usually do with my guests, so I broke the conversation into 2 episodes. Since Frontline is a nonprofit, I'm going to try and do some fundraising through September, so stay tuned for that. Thank you for listening to part 1 of my conversation with Mike Cancellieri. We are back on Twisted Remedies podcast. My guest today is Mike Cancellieri. Mike is the founder and executive director of Frontline Foundations of North America. Mike has a BA in criminal justice, lots of experience in the mental health field with some inpatient psychiatric settings, and does have a martial arts background for all of you keeping track. So I'm going to let Mike jump into that, but welcome and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Justin. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I dig what you're doing with this podcast big time. Happy to be on.
Thank you. Can you just kind of walk through, I just breezed through your, the last many years of your life. Can you just expand on some of that and stuff you think is crucial to the conversation?
Yeah, I went to college for criminal justice. My older brother is 10 years older than I am. He was a police officer. He's a semi-retired police officer now. And I thought about being a police officer early on in high school and college, and life took me in a different direction. We moved up to New England from New Jersey, where my wife and I are originally from, because my wife was going to Antioch in Keene, New Hampshire for environmental studies. And here I am with a criminal justice degree and not necessarily wanting to enter a law enforcement career at that point in my life. What can I do with a social and behavioral sciences degree that is available for work in New England when I moved up here? That's how I got into the mental health field. I thought it would be interesting, and it sure was. And continues to be, but in much better ways now that I'm working with veterans and first responders. That's the short version.
Yep.
You mentioned my martial arts background. What that does for me is give me the ability not to panic when someone hits me in the face. That is important. It is a skill, but I really haven't kept up with. I did about 4 or 5 years, fairly seriously in a school down in New Jersey. Was teaching a style called United States Black Cat Kempo, which is a mixture of a bunch of different things. We had, typical Taekwondo style kicking, traditional stuff from Okinawan karate, Aikido, joint locks and throws, and good old-fashioned like collegiate wrestling for ground techniques. It was really cool. It was like, I feel like at the time I was in that school, it was right before this country went nuts with lawsuits and tort reform or whatever goes on. And it was almost like old school Karate Kid style instruction, and legit instruction too. These people were serious. So yeah, that's that. I think that gave me a seat at the table to talk about martial arts and some of the things it's done for me. But I haven't kept up with my training, and I wouldn't step in the ring with a 15-year-old right now.
Yeah, it's definitely a perishable skill. And
no doubt.
Do you miss it? Are there times where you wish you were still training?
Yeah, totally. Like there's so many benefits to no matter what, even if you're studying like a super traditional Chinese martial art, like wushu or whatever, there's still so many benefits just in terms of physical activity, movement, getting oxygen into the body, the discipline involved. There's a lot to it. And if I had, you got the time for whatever you want to do generally. But if I had the time, I would pick up some jiu-jitsu for sure. That would be something I'd want to study, but you got to prioritize what you do with your time. And I don't have the time to take it seriously. And I don't probably like a lot of people like us, I don't like to half-ass things.
Yeah.
So someday though, maybe when I'm 60, I'll start jiu-jitsu like Anthony Bourdain.
It's never too late.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah. So I think a good place to start is what's the story behind Frontline Foundations? And well, I guess what is Frontline Foundations and how did that come to be?
Cool. Yeah. Frontline Foundations is a 501c3 nonprofit healthcare organization. We basically treat PTSD for veterans and first responders. We also include anyone who is suffering in the same way. So this might include like DCF investigators, children and family type of stuff, attorneys that prosecute like child trafficking and sex crimes. But we mostly just advertise for vets and first responders, and that's who most of our clients are. There's three things that we do. I will go out to different departments, police departments, fire departments, to do in-service trainings on resiliency skills. How to have a long and sustainable career in law enforcement, military, fire service without accumulating the type of trauma that slows us down in our lives and stuff. So just the emphasis on those in-service trainings is resiliency skills, how to continue this job without sort of getting stuck. The second thing we do is I have two clinicians that see clients for individual therapy. If people can just come in for individual therapy on an outpatient basis. We pride ourselves on being one of the few culturally competent mental health organizations for vets and first responders. Like, we really have some sense of what you guys go through. My two clinicians that see people for individual therapy, both of them were firefighters and paramedics for about 15 years each. That's different from law enforcement. It's different from the military, but it's close enough that we get it.
Right.
We certainly get it. And then the third thing Frontline Foundations does is we run a 5-day intensive outpatient program that teaches the same resiliency skills that I would bring to your department for an in-service training, but it's for people that are feeling kind of stuck in their lives and need just some kind of leg up to start grappling with the weight of all the experiences they've had. We do that once a month. It's typically about 6 people, 6 clients. It's a mindfulness-based program. And I could say much more about like our philosophy behind what we do, why we do it. Everything we do is intentional. Everything right down to the way my wife, Lila, has organized the decor in the place is intentional to promote the right kind of environment to work on what we need to work on. So that's Frontline Foundations in a nutshell. We started in 2020, which is a great time to start a healthcare organization.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, there was nothing going on then.
No, it was real easy. Just everything was greased.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned, this just struck me as you were saying this, that, the fire service is different. But as I think about my last couple of years on the job and even talking to people I know who are still working in fire service, I feel like it's shifted in the last couple of years with the kind of calls that firefighters are going to are not just, like there's so much fire suppression. I don't think they're putting out a whole lot of fires, right, especially in like urban areas.
Sure.
And they're going and they're having to deal with a lot more of the same stuff that, typically that police are going to. So that I think there is definitely tons of overlap there for sure.
Absolutely. All of these jobs that we deal with have radically changed in the last, whatever time period you want to put on it, 20 years. But yeah, I'll have young firefighters, that are 25 years old or something like that grew up pushing a fire truck around the Christmas tree, right, and they had a Dalmatian in the whole 9 yards, and they want to be like a firefighter. And they are starting to discover that their job is a lot. They really are pushing professional firefighters towards EMS. And even if you are a interior firefighter, you might just be Narcanning the same people, right, on your street corner in your city over and over again. And that's a radically different job.
Yeah.
So that tends to weigh on people.
Yeah. Well, and they also end up dealing with a lot of the mental health, population that is, that needs those kind of services. So it's definitely, I think more taxing than, it's differently taxing than it was years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. So Frontline, were there gaps in services and systems that you saw from, you worked in inpatient psychiatric. So, it may not be a 1-to-1 correlation, but there's definitely some consistency there. But were there gaps in services and things that were provided that you were looking to fill?
Yeah, for sure. part of my story, speaking of inpatient psychiatric stuff, the reason I feel comfortable talking to veterans and first responders about trauma, even though I've never served in the military and I've never been a first responder, for about 10 years, I worked in a locked psychiatric facility where violence was an absolute guarantee every day. And just like many of our listeners, I would imagine that lots of people have the experience where if you're good at something at your job, you kind of get funneled into doing more of that same thing. And in your department, you become the specialist for whatever it is.
Yep.
You don't get paid for that differently. It's just like, oh, yeah, Justin's really good at this situation. Yeah. We'll send him out. That's what happened to me in terms of violent psychiatric emergencies. I became like Mr. Emergency in a way. And I had a lot of other people there helping me on my team. I trained everyone in that hospital on how to deal with these emergencies, and I had a lot of co-instructors that were excellent as well. But my experience basically became rolling out to what we called codes, a couple of 3, 4, 6 times more times per shift, violence, really severe injuries, almost exclusively on the staff side. We really prided ourselves on never injuring the patients. Every once in a while you get a skinned knee, right, fat lip type of thing, but how are we going to take down a guy that weighs 365 pounds and is 6'5" without hurting him and without being able to use joint manipulation, throws, pain compliance, and none of that? So we did a very good job. I racked up some trauma doing that for about 10 years that started to really affect my life. And so, a couple of things happened. I had my own sort of, for lack of a better term, come to Jesus moment about, I don't think I could do this particular job anymore.
Yep.
Right at that time, within the same organization, there was a program, an outpatient program for vets and first responders, and an opening popped up. So I slid right over there, and it was a loosely mindfulness-based program. Wasn't quite as legit as what I'm teaching now, not to sound arrogant, but I loved the work, I loved the clients, I loved the team, and I found out that my personal experiences in the previous 10 years gave me the ability to communicate with vets and first responders. I kind of speak the same language. Like I know what, especially for police and fire, like I know what it's like to be kind of minding your own business, doing admin stuff, and then an alarm goes off, and 3 minutes later, you're like fighting for your life. Like, right. I know exactly what that's like. So I have the ability to talk to people who have had similar experiences. And so to answer the question you asked 20 minutes ago about like what gaps there were, the same thing I was saying about cultural competence. There's like a lot of people are very well-meaning and really want to help, and especially want to help vets and first responders, but you really need to speak the language. You really need to know what the issues are and what they might be going through in their emotions and in their thoughts to be able to communicate effectively. Because the whole like, how does that make you feel? Right. Vibe does not work. So I don't know if that's an answer to your question.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a certain amount of, well, obviously you have to build trust with somebody that you're trying to work with. And I think if you are approaching something and you don't speak the language, or you don't have the same perspective, it's a lot harder to overcome that trust barrier.
Absolutely.
And I think that I like that, that cultural competency piece is, I think without that, it's you're painting and you don't have all the colors.
Yeah, that's a great way
like
to put
it's it. You're giving your best effort to do something, but if you're not able to connect, like that connection, and I mean just from having known you for a bit and the retreat, and I'll probably get into that in a little bit, but having seen you in action with first responders, you definitely have that. You've overcome that barrier because you speak the language and you have lived experience, that you're not just talking from a textbook. You're talking from, listen, I get it. Like I've been there. So I think that's a critically important piece that a lot of agencies, like partner with people who look great on paper, but when it's time to get people to, get help and and do the work, I think there's shortcomings.
Yeah, for sure. One of my favorite, I guess, I don't know what to call it. There's a graphic novel called Stick Vet. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's a guy that's a combat vet that draws like stick figures and is about his experience getting treatment for PTSD.
Oh, wow.
My favorite panel is, it's all stick figures. It's
Yeah.
hilarious. But my favorite panel, he's at the window, the check-in window at the VA, and it says, "Hi, my name is Stick Vet. I'm here to see a civilian intern for counseling." And it just cracks me up because it's like, I'm a civilian for sure.
Right.
But like just I totally get where he's coming from.
Yep.
And like, I never wanted to be that guy working with vets and first responders. And so one of like the specific things I see, we're going to talk about stigma at some point, but like one barrier to treatment I see a lot is guys that have like a high speed nature. They're switched on. They have excellent situational awareness. They have a lot of specialized skills and training to keep people that they love safe and to keep things that they care about safe. And a lot of their experience going to see mental health providers, they can be made to feel paranoid. It's like, what do you mean you have a go bag in your truck that you don't even go to Walmart without this bag that you put in your truck? And it's like, that's not paranoid if you understand the experience. And also it's like a skill set. So like what we do at Frontline Foundations is try to teach ourselves and our clients how to separate when you need to be switched on and when you don't. A lot of people are afraid that if they get help, if they talk to a therapist, if they start meditating, it's going to make them a less effective operator, law enforcement officer, firefighter. And it's just the opposite. It makes you so much better if you get a good night's sleep and you're feeling healthy. And it's not gonna remove your skill set. An example I always give to my clients is if you are taking your family on vacation and you pull off at a rest stop on 95 in an area that you don't know, I want you to be switched on and to have your head on a swivel and to have a little huddle with your kids and explain, if we get separated, this is where we're going to meet and all of that. But that should not be the vibe at your dinner table every single night. Maybe. You know what I'm saying? It's like when to use these skills and when not. It's like having a tool in your hand. When do you pick up this tool and when can you put the tool down? Christmas morning, Thanksgiving, when you come home from work, these are good times to put the tools down. But I don't tell anyone that they can't have a go bag, that they can't be switched on, that they can't have, their skill set is a big, proud part of their life. So anyway, I don't even remember what the question you asked was, but that's what we really try to do. We try to teach people how to, when to be suited up and when to be dad,
right,
or when to be a musician,
Yeah, I think I did just shy of 24 and survived. But I think, there certainly is a detriment to always being switched on because it's exhausting, and it's usually like, I wasn't like super operational, but like, I was in some narcotics positions and places where you had to pay attention or things could go kind of bad. And there's a certain amount of, it's not complacency. There's a certain amount of, if you combine that switched on with trauma, there's a certain amount of numbness that ekes into the mix. And it's really, I think it's even harder to recognize at that point that you need to switch off, because that's the only, like in some cases, that's the only thing you're clinging to is I am switched on. I have to be switched on because if I switch off, it's messy, and I don't messy can be scary if you don't have the right captain navigating the boat through the through the channel. So, which I think is a good segue that I set up for myself.
Nicely done.
So how does, you mentioned like your approach is the cultural competency piece, and it's mindfulness based, but how is Frontline different than, like, what are you doing that's different than these other places that really gets, aside from you speak the language and you've got, you've got the credibility behind it. What is the formula, or what are you doing that's different that gets results?
Yeah, well, this would be a good place to talk about like our general philosophy, maybe.
Yeah.
And that's, for like 10,000 years or so, human beings had a way of preparing warriors for battle, and human beings had a way of welcoming warriors home from battle so that they could be integrated back into their normal societal roles. And this is something that pops up everywhere in human history when you study it. I've been particularly focused on like the Western American Indian traditions lately, like the Lakota people, that kind of thing. But you see this in southern North America with the Aztecs. You see it in Amerindian populations in South America. Any indigenous population around the world seems to have the same sort of framework for preparing warriors for battle and for welcoming them home. We don't have that anymore. So the broad answer to the question is what Frontline Foundations does is we try to recreate how human beings have been welcoming warriors home for thousands of years. In order to do that, I have to kind of remind or educate, I guess. I don't want to sound like arrogant, but I gotta bring people in that like, hey, if you're a police officer, you're a warrior. That makes a lot of sense. But even like if you are an EMT in the back of an ambulance, you are a warrior. And I'm talking like culturally, like archetypally, to use a big mental health word. What makes up a warrior in this definition? You are part of a tight-knit cultural group. So cops versus firefighters in the bowling league, like we used to take people out to do that. Like that's a tight-knit cultural group. EMS is a tight-knit cultural group. So that's one check mark for what a warrior is. Another one is specialized skills and training. Cool, that's a check. We all got specialized skills and training. Another one is engaged in an ongoing struggle. So that is no doubt, right? That's what it is. My experience that 10 years or so I was working inpatient in the psychiatric hospital. A couple of things happened during that 10 years. There was a Hurricane Irene, which turned the state hospital, it ruined the state hospital, and it turned my nice little psychiatric hospital into the state hospital. And the rest of those years that I worked there was radically different from the first couple of years. And there was high points and low points and danger and good leadership and bad leadership. That's an ongoing struggle. I mean, that has the flavor of a campaign to it. Same thing if you're a firefighter. A lot of my firefighters in some of the bigger professional departments around here have seen their job, like we talked about earlier, radically change in response to the opioid crisis, in response to the homelessness crisis, everything that came with COVID. So ongoing struggle. That's part of what makes a warrior. And the last element is, self-sacrifice, man. Like willingness to sacrifice yourself for the good of your group. Maybe your group is your partner in your squad car. Maybe your group is your whole shift. Maybe your group is the town that you work in or work for. But self-sacrifice for the group, and that runs the entire gamut from small self-sacrifice, like you've had to take a leak for the last 2 hours, but you can't get to it because you're helping people out, all the way up to the ultimate sacrifice that we've seen a lot of our colleagues make. That's what a warrior is. I'm talking culturally. And so culturally, human beings know how to work with that. We've lost it. We've lost it in the last couple of 100 years. Some of the advances that we've made in science and technology have come at the cost of losing some of our roots, would be a way to talk about it. So that's kind of what we try to recreate, some of the things that are necessary for warriors to heal. And I can get into that.
Yeah, like what are some examples of those methods?
Yeah, so traditionally, in preparation for battle for warriors, like there'd be a lot of different things that would be done intentionally, like a sweat lodge. And we're probably going to talk about those types of practices a little bit later. But you get into the sweat lodge, you'd experience that physical feeling of exhausting everything that you had in your body, focusing the mind. They would sing traveling songs. They would get themselves kind of pumped up, and everyone would leave together to go to battle. And then on homecoming, there's 4 different stages, and you'll see these 4 stages regardless of where the culture is. The way that I'm going to talk about this is really heavily influenced by the work of Dr. Edward Tick, who we can probably link to some of his books, which are good. But the first phase in homecoming for warriors is what they would call isolation and tending. Not isolation in the bad sense, which is something that people like us are at risk for, but isolation meaning when you come back from battle, you should probably be with people that understand what you've just been through for a little while. And you should probably be tended to by people that really care about you and they know who you are. Like they know who Justin was before the military. They know who you were as a little kid. So that's an important part of coming home, and we don't get that anymore.
Right.
The starkest example is for our combat vets in Iraq and Afghanistan recently. Of course, our Vietnam vets did not get a great welcome home, and we all are grappling with that to this day. But like what didn't quite happen so much in the Vietnam era that happens now is you could be involved in some heavy-duty combat in like Iraq and hop on a series of airplanes, and like maybe 48 hours later, you're standing in Boston Logan listening to someone bitch that Starbucks got your order or got their order wrong, right? That's like, that is not at all the right way to come home.
There's no wind down.
No wind down. I had a job one time that it was a 5-minute commute to like a hardware store I worked at. And I was like, there's not enough wind down for my hardware store job. So that isolation and tending phase is really important. And one of the most important parts of that is when you come back from battle, they will speak your true name back to you. Not the name that's on your gear, not your call sign, not like the cool nickname that you earned in boot camp or whatever, or your embarrassing nickname. They speak your true name back to you to remind you who you are. And of course, you are now that person plus skills, experience, and that's not a bad thing. But if you lose who you were in the beginning, there's some negative things in our thoughts and feelings that can happen. So that's the first phase, isolation and tending. Not bad isolation, but like welcoming you back to here's other warriors and elder warriors. So that's like one thing that we do at FLF if you come to our 5-day program, it's isolation. Meaning there's nobody that works for us that isn't here because this is exactly what they want to do.
Right.
Nobody at FLF is there because, this sounds like the way I got into the mental health field, like, this will be interesting. Nobody is there for that. It's all because we've either had personal firsthand experience with job-related trauma, or like in the case of my lovely wife, who's our office administrator and a million different other jobs. Her father's a Vietnam vet. We have a clinical mental health counseling intern with us right now whose brother is a Marine Corps veteran. Everybody else is retired fire or police. So that isolation and tending phase is huge, and it's good to be with people that get it. And that's what you don't get in the broader mental health, I want to say market, which I don't like that term, but actually that's what it is. Unfortunately.
I think that's strangely appropriate.
Yeah, man. So that's phase 1. I mean, doing quite a bit of talking here. You want me to keep going?
Yeah, cool. I mean, this is all, I think this is interesting stuff of the difference in the approach, because I would wager that places who aren't doing it this way we've already gone deeper than those, than I think a lot of, and I shouldn't say that. I'm sure there are other, entities out there who are striving to, do something similar. But I think for the, I guess for lack of a better word, the cookie cutter, you feel like you need to talk to somebody and they just send, somebody to a therapist that is out of, their list of therapists that they have.
Yeah.
I think we have already gone subterranean on the level that, that is out there. So I think this is fascinating and good for people to hear.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Yeah, a quick sidebar. Like when I decided in my job that I need some help with the stress and trauma that I was dealing with, wrestling psychotic people for um, years, I decided to avail myself of our organization's EAP, our
Mm.
Employee Assistance Program. And I got myself an appointment, and I was all excited. Not excited, but I was like, "Good! I broke the ice. I'm going to get some help." Within 5 minutes, this therapist, who I'm sure was a skilled therapist, who was very well-meaning and probably very good at what she does, but she said to me, "Oh, I don't do trauma work."
Great.
And then there was like crickets for a little bit. I was like, "Wait," and I looked at like, "Am I in the right place?" Like, you're the EAP for a psychiatric hospital and you don't do trauma work? That's a little upsetting and surprising. So yeah, I mean, that's just in the idea that we are intentionally trying to create an environment specifically for warriors.
Yeah.
I think we've already gone a long way to not having the experience that I had be repeated. Yeah, and so like the second phase in this traditional model is what might be called purification and cleansing. And surprise, surprise, you get back in the sweat lodge because that's very important. There's something from your jujitsu experience and from a million other experiences. There's something really healing about sweating,
Hmm.
like a real serious sweat. That I mean, it's physically and medically cleansing for sure, but like emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, you feel cleansed when you just got it all out. So that sweat lodge is real important. Praying as hard as you can is language that I picked up about this purification and cleansing phase, and I think that can be a really important part of healing. I don't get too specific with that in my program because I'm not trying to push any particular spiritual system on anyone,
Right.
but that for 10,000 years that was an important part of coming back. Um, and trying to make yourself a little bit more humble. Uh, and that's a tough one to talk around because I'm not saying that people like us, by and large, like your problem is you're not humble enough. It's like that's some guy's problem and gals for sure, but it's more about like changing your perspective and looking at the larger um, situation. And so we don't have like a sweat lodge at FLF yet, but part of what we do is through talking, through storytelling, through having a lot of laughs, through some physical activity that we do. We address that cleansing and purification element in that way. And one thing I'm working on right now is how to take this model that I'm taking you guys through and how to put it into like your day when you get home from your job as a law enforcement officer, how to take these elements and put it into your day.
Right.
So cleansing and purification might be sweat lodge, cold plunge when you get home, that kind of thing. But moving on with this 4-part framework, the third important element in homecoming is in fact storytelling. And it's stories not only of trauma, but also of triumph. Now, when people come to our program, when people come to any program, they're usually concerned that like they're going to be made to spill their guts and they're going to be made to talk about stuff that they don't want to talk about. And we don't do that at FLF. Nobody has to say a damn thing that they're not totally comfortable talking about. We do encourage people to be able, and we try to teach some skills for communicating your experiences in a way that doesn't make you say something that or reveal the details of something that you're not comfortable with. Imagine coming home and talking to your kids and they know that you're looking a little rough coming home and what's wrong? And you say everything's fine.
Right.
It's like everything is not fine. We were at a first responder conference and Dr. Nicole Sawyer, who's a clinical psychologist that we work with sometimes, did a great job of talking about you tell your daughter that you're fine and it's clear that you're not fine. You've just taught your daughter that she can't read you and her ability to read people is inaccurate.
Yep.
So the storytelling piece of this framework can be like, even with your kids, like, yeah, I have a very difficult job. Not everybody has a very difficult job. I see people on the worst day of their life, and I do that 3, 4, 6 times a day. And today I had a very difficult call that involved children. and I love you. And when I see children, sometimes it reminds me of how much I love my own children. And it's like, that's all you have to say.
Right.
And by the way, I'm not saying that that's even easy at that level. That might not be easy, but I think it's important. And that level of discussion will improve your life so much, your relationship with your family, with your children, with your friends. Just being able to talk about your experience in categories so people feel like you're letting them in a little bit. You don't have to give the details. And that's the model that we use at Frontline Foundations. When we have a discussion group that's, on paper, it's a psychotherapy group, but that word freaks people out.
Right. Yeah.
But like, it's
nope.
yeah. So no, that's not. I thought you guys were about like, teepees and sweat lodges and stuff. The hell's it? But yeah, the psychotherapy group, which is really a discussion group in the middle of the day, is what that is for. It's for that storytelling piece that is so important to the health of our vets and first responders and warriors. And people go deeper than they thought they would. That's a common experience. We are very cognizant, and we try to be very skilled about not leading someone down a road that's going to go deeper than they should at 1 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, for instance. But that storytelling piece is very important to relate your experiences. We have a peer counselor on our staff named Joe Gorman, who's a veteran firefighter and just an amazing guy. And the language that he uses is, you got to get it past your teeth. And I think that's a really cool way to put it. That storytelling is important. The traditional element that makes it so important is it transfers the responsibility for things that you have done in the name of your job that you might not have grown up as a kid thinking, I'm going to hold some particular person down on the ground for whatever reason. Combat veterans have a lot of experiences of seeing themselves do things that were absolutely necessary at the time, but then they're left struggling with like, what if I could have made a different decision? So the storytelling phase helps transfer the responsibility from you to the group in whose name you acted. That could be the United States of America.
Yep.
That could be Brattleboro Police Department. That could be your coverage area if you're a paramedic in the North Country. Could be whatever it is. And it's not, part of the reason these things are so tough to talk about is I just said the word, it transfers responsibility away from you. And people like us don't like that.
Right.
It's like, no, it's my responsibility. It's a different way of thinking about it, though. I'm responsible for every action I've ever taken. But some of the things that I've had to do in the psychiatric field that I never saw myself doing, I realize that I have done that in the name of the institution and the regulations in the state and what I've been mandated to do by the law and by doctors and the situation. So that's what I'm talking about. And that storytelling phase is so crucial for that. Yeah. So like, it helps people realize they're not the biggest asshole in their department or not the biggest asshole in the room or in the world or in their family. It's like, moral injury is a technical term for when you see yourself doing something that you never thought you would do. My example, I guess I'll talk about it. My example of that is working with teenagers on an inpatient unit. I worked with many young teenage females who had an absolutely horrendous abuse history, probably involving sexual abuse, and for a variety of good reasons, like they were trying to kill someone else or themselves, I was put in a position where I now have to hold down with other people, with a team, but I have to hold down a female teenager who is now definitely re-experiencing all of her trauma. Right. And there's a sound to that. There is a sound to that is real hard to handle. So that storytelling phase is like a thing that will help remind me of like, I can't let this girl kill herself or anybody else. That's why I had to do this.
Right.
And that example, I'm sure, hits home pretty good with a lot of our listeners, maybe in different scenarios, but that exact type of thing. So that's the storytelling phase.
So the thing that comes to mind with that and you mentioned that transfer of responsibility is tough, but as I'm hearing you talk about it, I think the other thing that strikes me is there's a certain amount of vulnerability that has to be involved in that.
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of the whole stigma piece, but that vulnerability, again, when that starts happening, that's where things can get messy.
Yeah.
And, and I think a lot of people look at it like, well, it's easier if I don't have to deal with the mess.
Yeah.
And so in that storytelling, how do you overcome that vulnerability piece and get people to cross the line into, whatever level of the story they're going to share?
Yeah.
Saying anything is getting, is an achievement. So I think, especially, there's varying degrees in that, but there is definitely, that's a big step. A big first step is, well, going for one is a big step.
No doubt.
But I think when you get there and, okay, we're going to talk about whatever we're going to talk about, and you can talk about it in the, to the extent you want to, but that's still a leap of vulnerability and trust. And how do you overcome that?
Yeah, well, through education, and there's two specific things that we really try to hammer home. So before we really get into the storytelling and the vulnerability, I'm hitting people with just straight up education. We start out with mindfulness, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is like over 2,000 years old. And I do a lot on what we call trauma and the stress response. It's like how the body and the mind react to repeated trauma exposure. And we talk about the limbic system versus the neocortex and adrenaline and cortisol and the amygdala and the hippocampus and all this stuff. And that sets the stage to really explain why it is that you have to feel switched on all the time.
Yeah.
Why it is that you can never let your guard down. And I still, I'm trying to practice what I preach. I'm on this journey with you and with everybody else that comes to this program. So I still have some of the things, being overly switched on in certain situations. I don't like having my back to the door in a restaurant. I don't like being in crowds. But that education piece about how the body and the mind adapt to keep you functioning in your 25-year law enforcement career, that really helps people realize, like, oh, I'm not the biggest asshole in my department.
Right.
I'm not, there's no way I'm the only guy or gal that's feeling this way. So that starts to pave the way a little bit for a little bit of, opening up and being just a tad vulnerable. And the second thing is to really just hammer home the point that we have all built up a wall, like in front of our hearts. If you're coming home to little kids and you're dealing with horrendous stuff out there on your job involving little kids, you're going to need a wall in front of your heart, because if that shit gets in there, you are not going to have such an easy time doing your job. The problem is that wall is up 24/7,
right? And
it keeps the bad stuff out and it keeps the good stuff out. So we have a variety of different ways we talk about it. Sometimes it's just exactly what I just said, but that 1-2 punch, so to speak, of like, hey, this is how the body and the mind have adapted to keep you functioning in your career. This is an emotional thing that everybody has to do to survive, and it's time to start opening up a little bit, softening that wall. I think of it like in visuals in my head. I think of it as a wall that's made out of ice. And I want to just start to melt that wall just a little bit so that you can talk about some experiences that you've had. And again, it's not gory details. It's just like, I was in a tough call. It involved children. Or I was in a tough call. It involved, drugs, and I've lost people I love in my life to drugs.
Yeah.
So just explaining how that stuff works. I mean, that whole "you're not the biggest asshole" thing, I hate to keep harping on that, but that's a real difference that we have really mastered that at FLF.
Yeah.
Helping you realize that it's not you. It's like this is the way things work. So
yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for listening to episode 1 of my conversation with Mike Cancellieri from Frontline Foundations. Part 2 of the conversation will be coming soon, and again, there will be a fundraiser component for this month, for September. So please consider contributing to Frontline Foundations to keep their mission moving forward. As always, thank you for listening. If you know someone who would benefit from the show, please share it with them. And as always, take care of yourself and take care of each other.